They came from my soul with a notice of violation, typed on cheap paper bearing the pretentious crest of the Preserve at Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. My ranch, 500 acres of sovereign Texas dirt my family had bled into for 3 generations, was, according to one Miss Karen von Uberalles, president, a non-conforming eyesore, and an affront to the delicate sensibilities of the cul-de-sac commandos who'd recently sprouted tract homes like fungi on what used to be Miller's pasture, bordering my western fence line. The notice cited the unapproved agricultural activities that would be raising cattle on a cattle ranch, and the rustic state of boundary demarcations, which was their euphemism for the split-rail fence my grandfather had set with his own hands. I remember reading it, the ink still smelling faintly of the toner from their overzealous office printer, and a cold amusement settled in my gut. They had no jurisdiction, no standing, no goddamn right. My property predated their little empire of beige by a century. My land was never ceded to their petty kingdom. I penned a polite, legally precise letter explaining this, referencing county records, land grants, and the simple, immutable fact that my ranch was not, and never would be, part of their preserve. I suggested, with the thinnest veneer of civility, that they consult an actual attorney before troubling me further. I imagined Ms. von Uberalles' face, pinched and sour, as she read it. I sealed the envelope and went back to mending a section of that same rustic fence, the scent of cedar and honest work a balm against their encroaching absurdity. The sun was setting, painting the vast expanse of my ranch in hues of orange and purple, a landscape that whispered of history, of resilience, of belonging. This was more than just land. It was a testament, and they thought they could tame it with a 3-ring binder and a set of bylaws written by aspiring fascists. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost breathtaking. They genuinely believed their little rulebook, designed for postage stamp lots and synchronized lawn mowing, could somehow reach across boundaries and time to lay claim to the heart of my heritage. This wasn't just a dispute over land. It was a dispute over reality itself. Their reality, sterile and controlled, versus mine, raw and earned. My initial amusement began to curdle into something harder, something colder. They had mistaken quiet dignity for weakness. They would soon learn the difference. The initial skirmish was over. The war was about to begin over my land, my ranch, my very existence there. The polite letter, of course, achieved nothing but to inflame their sense of self-importance. Ms. von Uberalles, it turned out, considered herself a legal scholar by virtue of having binge-watched several seasons of a courtroom drama. The HOA's response was an escalation, a thick packet of further violations, now including the unlicensed commercial operation, my small, honor system farm stand selling surplus organic vegetables and fresh eggs, the improper storage of agricultural equipment, my meticulously maintained tractor parked in its designated shed, and, my personal favorite, failure to adhere to community aesthetic guidelines regarding livestock visibility. Apparently, my prize-winning Charolais bull, magnificent in his power, offended their delicate suburban eyes from half a mile away. The letters became weekly, then daily, each more unhinged than the last. They started sending their compliance officer, a portly man named Gary with a cheap security badge and an ill-fitting polo shirt, to take pictures from the road. I'd watch him from my porch, sipping coffee, my face an impassive mask. My wife, bless her steadfast heart, started to worry. "They seem unhinged," she'd say, her voice tight. "This isn't normal." "No, it isn't normal, I'd think. It's predatory." Then came the fence. Not just any fence. They contracted some fly-by-night outfit to erect an 8-foot chain-link barrier topped with concertina wire directly on my property line, effectively boxing in my main pasture that bordered their development. They claimed it was for resident safety, to prevent my dangerous livestock from escaping, my cattle who wouldn't harm a fly unless it was actively trying to build a condo on their grazing land. They fenced off nearly 100 acres of my prime pasture. My land, my ranch, the sheer aggression of it, the blatant trespass, was a declaration of war. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd obliterated it with steel and wire. My attorney, a sharp, quiet man named Ben Coulter who'd known my father, sent another, much colder, cease and desist, citing trespass, property damage, and a litany of other offenses. The HOA's response, through their equally incompetent lawyer, was to double down, asserting their right to protect their community. They were building a cage around me, piece by piece, trying to choke the life out of my ranch, out of my family. The stress was a constant thrum beneath the surface of our days. My children, who had grown up with the freedom of this land, started asking why there were bad people putting up ugly fences on our property. How do you explain pure, unadulterated malice to a child? You can't. You just resolve to end it. The fines began to accumulate, astronomical sums for imaginary infractions. $250,000 for the unapproved fence, my existing historic fence, not their monstrosity. $500,000 for environmental hazards, cow manure on a ranch. It was beyond parody. It was calculated financial warfare. We ignored them, on Ben's advice. Then came the day I will never forget. I was in town securing a new supplier for mineral supplements when my wife called, her voice shaking. "They're here," she whispered. "They have papers. They say we have to leave." They kicked me out of the house, told me to wait by the gate. A rage, so pure and cold it was almost sublime, flooded my veins. I broke every conceivable speed limit getting back to my ranch. There, at my gate, stood my wife and 2 children, their faces pale. And on my porch, lounging in my grandfather's rocking chair, was Gary, the compliance officer, flanked by 2 thuggish individuals wearing HOA security jackets and openly carrying sidearms. Ms. Von Uberalis herself was directing men who were changing the locks on my front door. They had somehow, through means I would later discover involved outright fraud and a deeply compromised local magistrate, obtained an ex parte eviction order. They kicked me out of my own home, evicted me from the land my ancestors had tamed. The sheer, unmitigated gall. My ranch, now occupied by these vultures. I approached, my hands deliberately open, my voice dangerously calm. "Ms. Von Uberalis," I said, my tone like chipped ice. "You have made a catastrophic miscalculation." She smirked, a truly grotesque distortion of her features. "The preserve has standards, Mr. Henderson, and your property no longer meets them. This land will be put to better use." Gary puffed out his chest. The 2 goons shifted their weight. My family watched, terrified. It took every ounce of my discipline not to unleash the fury coiling inside me. But I knew this wasn't the moment for raw emotion. This was the moment for cold, hard strategy. I gathered my family. "We'll go," I said, my eyes locking on to Von Uberalis. "For now. But know this. Every single action you have taken, every lie you have told, every inch of my land you have defiled will be accounted for. You will wish you had never heard the name Henderson." Her laugh was brittle. "She thinks she's won," I thought. "She has no idea what she's started." We drove away, leaving my ranch, my heritage, in the hands of thieves. The image of that chain link fence, the new locks on my door, the smug look on von Uberallis' face, it was seared into my memory, fuel for the reckoning to come. We found temporary refuge with my wife's sister in a nearby town, a cramped but welcoming space that felt 1,000,000 miles from the open skies of my ranch. The displacement was a physical ache. My children were confused and scared. My wife, though outwardly strong, was frayed. My primary focus, however, became singular: the systematic dismantling of Karen von Uberallis and her entire corrupt HOA. Ben Coulter was already in motion, filing emergency appeals, injunctions, and a massive lawsuit for illegal eviction, trespass, conspiracy, and a host of other charges. But the wheels of justice, especially when greased by local corruption, turned slowly. In the meantime, the HOA, emboldened by their apparent victory, moved with sickening speed. Within weeks, I saw it from the county road: bulldozers on my land. My land. They were clearing the very pasture where my grandfather had taught me to ride, leveling the small hill where my father had proposed to my mother. News reached us through sympathetic, though cowed, neighbors from the fringes of their preserve. The HOA had announced Harmony Acres, a new development of 100 luxury homes, to be built on the stolen acres of my ranch. The promotional materials, which someone anonymously slipped into Ben's mailbox, were nauseating, computer-generated images of bland, oversized houses crammed together, all marketed with taglines like "Experience Tranquility, Reimagined." They were building homes on my ranch, on the ashes of my family's history. The sheer audacity was a constant, throbbing insult. Each day brought fresh reports of destruction. Ancient oaks felled. The creek where my kids caught crawdads, rerouted and concreted. They were erasing me, paving over my legacy with their cheap, soulless vision. But with every report, my resolve hardened. I channeled the grief, the anger, into meticulous preparation. Ben and I worked day and night, gathering evidence, depositions, financial records. We learned of von Uberallis' kickbacks from the contractors, the sweetheart deals, the network of cronyism that had allowed this travesty. They were so arrogant, so sure of their impunity, they didn't even bother to cover their tracks well. While they poured concrete, I pored over documents. While they hammered frames for their ill-gotten homes, I hammered out the legal framework for their destruction. The irony was not lost on me. They were, in their avarice, creating the very evidence that would bring them down, building their own gallows with every new foundation laid on my property. The sight of those emerging structures, visible from miles away, was a constant torment but also a perverse motivation. Each new roofline was another nail in their coffin. They thought they were building an empire. They were, in fact, constructing a monument to their own spectacular downfall. The HOA, drunk on what they perceived as unchecked power and facing the enormous costs of their premature development on my land, grew desperate for capital. Their Harmony Acres project, built on a foundation of theft and hubris, was a financial black hole. So, with characteristic shamelessness, they put the entire the illegally seized land upon which these 100 nascent homes were being erected up for sale. They were actively selling my stolen property, marketing it as a prime investment opportunity. The listing, which Ben discovered through his network, was a masterpiece of deceptive language, glossing over any potential encumbrances and highlighting the rapidly appreciating value of the area. It was then that Atticus Thorne entered the picture. Thorne was a name whispered with a certain awe in real estate circles. A self-made millionaire, a developer known for his Midas touch, transforming undervalued land into gold. He was also known for his ruthlessness and his phalanx of razor-sharp lawyers. Thorne saw the Harmony Acres listing, a significant parcel of land, already partially developed with 100 homes underway, in a desirable location. It looked, on the surface, like a steal. The HOA, spearheaded by a preening Karen von Uberales, rolled out the red carpet. They feted him, flattered him, assured him that the minor title cloud from a disgruntled former occupant was a mere formality, soon to be resolved in their favor. They were selling him a poisoned chalice, and he, initially, seemed eager to drink. I watched this development with a grim fascination. Thorne's involvement was a wild card. He could either be another layer of complication or, potentially, an unwitting catalyst. Ben and I had a theory. Thorne, for all his aggressive tactics, was no fool. His legal team would conduct thorough due diligence, and our legal filings, meticulously lodged and publicly accessible, were waiting for them like a perfectly set snare. The HOA was so blinded by their greed, so convinced of their invincibility, that they believed they could con a seasoned shark like Thorne. The initial reports indicated Thorne was indeed interested. A significant offer was on the table for my ranch, or what the HOA was fraudulently presenting as their property to sell. The thought of my land, my heritage, being bartered by these thieves, and then falling into the hands of a corporate raider was a bitter pill. But Ben counseled patience. "Let them think they have him hooked," he said, a rare, thin smile playing on his lips. "The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And these HOA clowns are about to learn that trying to sell property they don't own to a man like Atticus Thorne is like trying to sell a leaky raft to a pirate." The pieces were moving on the board, and the game was about to take a very interesting turn. Our primary weapon, deployed months earlier with surgical precision, was a quiet title action combined with a lis pendens, Latin for suit pending. This legal notice, filed with the county recorder's office, attached itself to the deed of my property like an indelible stain, publicly declaring that ownership of this land was under active litigation. It was a red flag to any potential buyer, any title insurance company, any serious investor. The HOA, in their boundless arrogance and likely steered by their third-rate legal counsel, had either overlooked it, dismissed its significance, or, in their desperation, hoped to rush a sale through before its implications fully registered. They underestimated Atticus Thorne. While Karen von Uberales was probably practicing her acceptance speech for Developer of the Year, Thorne's legal team, a pack of wolves in bespoke suits, was doing what they did best. Dissecting every document, every claim, every potential liability associated with the Harmony Acres property. And there, glowing like a radioactive isotope in the county records, was our lis pendens. It was a bomb quietly ticking beneath the HOA's grand sale. The call came not from the HOA, but from a senior partner at Thorne's prestigious law firm. His name was Marcus Blackwood, and his voice was like polished granite. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Henderson," he stated, "my client, Mr. Atticus Thorne, has an interest in the parcel of land commonly known as Harmony Acres. Our due diligence has uncovered your lis pendens and the associated quiet title action. It appears the seller, the preserve at Whispering Pines HOA, may have misrepresented their ability to convey clear title to this land." There was no surprise in my voice, only the weary calm of a man who had been expecting this call. "Mr. Blackwood," I replied, "the HOA has never held legal title to that property. It is my ranch. They illegally evicted me and began construction without my consent. They are selling something they stole." A pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in Blackwood's mind. Thorne wanted the land, the potential profit from those 100 homes. But he couldn't proceed with a title so profoundly tainted. The HOA's entire scheme was unraveling. They had built 100 homes on land they didn't own, and now their prized millionaire buyer knew it. The leverage had shifted dramatically. The HOA was desperate to sell. Thorne was unwilling to buy a lawsuit of that magnitude directly from them. My land, my ranch, was the key, and I held it. The quiet, unassuming power of a correctly filed legal document, a testament to Ben Coulter's foresight, had brought a titan of industry and a petty tyranny to a standstill. The next move would be delicate, but the path was clearing. Marcus Blackwood, Thorne's legal eagle, proposed a meeting, not with the HOA, but with me and my counsel. Atticus Thorne, it seemed, was a pragmatist. He wanted the Harmony Acres development, or at least the land it sat upon, but he wanted it clean. He understood that the HOA was a toxic asset, their claim to the property fraudulent. The only way to secure unencumbered title to my ranch was to deal directly with the legitimate owner, me. The negotiation was held in a neutral, sterile conference room downtown, a world away from the sun-baked earth of my property. Thorne himself was present, a man whose aura of quiet intensity filled the room. He was flanked by Blackwood. On my side, Ben Coulter, calm and prepared. I laid out my terms, not with aggression, but with the unshakable certainty of a man whose rights had been grievously violated. I didn't want the half-built houses, those monuments, to the HOA's greed. I wanted compensation for my land, for the resources they had pillaged, for the timber they had cleared, for the emotional distress, for the sheer, unadulterated theft. I wanted a sum that reflected not just the market value of 500 acres, but the punitive cost of their illegal actions. My number was high, very high. Thorne didn't flinch. He listened, his eyes narrowed, occasionally conferring in hushed tones with Blackwood. He understood risk, and he understood value. Protracted litigation to evict the HOA and then fight me for the land would take years, cost millions, and the outcome would be uncertain. Buying the legitimate title from me, even at a premium, was the quicker, cleaner path to acquiring the underlying asset he desired. The HOA, I surmised, was to be discarded like the trash they were. They had served their purpose by, foolishly and illegally, starting the development, making the land more attractive to Thorne, but their inability to provide clean title made them an impediment. The negotiation was tough, forensic. Ben was magnificent, parrying every legal thrust, reinforcing our unassailable position. Thorne, to his credit, was direct. He wasn't interested in sentiment, only the bottom line. My land, my ranch, was now a commodity in a high-stakes game, but I was finally in a position to dictate terms. After hours, we reached an agreement. A figure that was, indeed, a nice amount of money. Enough to secure my family's future. Enough to compensate for the violation. Enough to ensure I never had to worry about petty tyrants again. The papers were drawn. I would sign over the title to my land to Thorne's corporation. In return, a certified check that would make Ms. von Uberallis weep with envy. The HOA, who thought they were selling this property to a millionaire, were about to be completely bypassed, left holding nothing but the liability for their illegal construction. My signature on that document was the sweetest act of severance. I was selling my ranch, yes, but on my terms to a buyer of my choosing, under duress perhaps, but with significant gain. And in doing so, I was setting the stage for the HOA's utter ruin. With the title to my former ranch now securely in Atticus Thorne's name, my name, not the HOA's, on the deed of sale to him, the millionaire turned his full, undivided attention to the preserve at Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Karen von Uberallis and her board were, I imagine, still celebrating their anticipated windfall from selling the stolen land, utterly oblivious that the rug had been pulled out from under them. Thorne, having paid a substantial sum to me for clear ownership, was not about to let the HOA off the hook for their fraudulent misrepresentations and the costs associated with the illegal construction they had initiated on land they never owned. Marcus Blackwood, Thorne's legal Rottweiler, unleashed a legal blitzkrieg. A lawsuit of staggering proportions landed on the HOA's doorstep, alleging fraud, unjust enrichment, slander of title, trespass, damages for the partially constructed homes, which Thorne now technically owned, as they were fixtures on the land he had legitimately purchased from me, and a demand for reimbursement of all development costs the HOA had sunk into my property before Thorne acquired it. The court filings were a public spectacle. Every lie the HOA had told, every shortcut they had taken, every penny von Uberallis had skimmed, was laid bare. The corrupt local magistrate who had issued the initial eviction order against me found himself under investigation by the State Judicial Commission, his career imploding. The HOA's insurance carrier, predictably, denied all claims, citing the board's willful engagement in illegal activities. There would be no financial shield. They had fenced off my property, kicked me out of my own ranch, and started building 100 homes with the blithe arrogance of conquerors, only to discover their entire empire was built on quicksand. The depositions were brutal. Von Uberallis, under oath, crumbled from a tin-pot dictator into a stammering, exposed fraud. Her attempts to blame underlings, contractors, or even me fell flat against the mountain of evidence Blackwood's team presented. The court found unequivocally in Thorne's favor. The judgment against the HOA was astronomical, far exceeding any assets they possessed. They were ordered to compensate Thorne for the value of the unauthorized improvements, the cost of rectifying their shoddy work, and punitive damages that made my settlement look modest. The HOA, which had terrorized an entire community and attempted to destroy my family's legacy, was financially obliterated. They didn't just lose, they were annihilated. The news of their ruin spread like wildfire. Residents of the preserve, long silenced by fear, began to speak out, their own stories of HOA abuse tumbling forth. The edifice of fear von Uberallis had constructed collapsed overnight. The downfall of the preserve at Whispering Pines Homeowners Association was swift and total. Faced with a judgment they couldn't possibly pay, their accounts frozen, their credibility shredded, the HOA declared bankruptcy. The 100 partially built homes on what was once my ranch became Thorne's outright, their fate to be decided by his development plans. He would likely complete them and sell them, recouping his costs and then some, but the HOA would see none of it. Karen von Uberallis, stripped of her power and facing potential personal liability for her role in the fraud, became a pariah. I heard she sold her oversized house in the preserve, at a loss, no doubt, as property values tanked with the HOA's implosion, and moved to another state, hopefully to a place with no authority to abuse. Gary, the compliance officer, was last seen applying for a job at a fast food restaurant. The HOA security goons vanished. The beautiful hand-carved wooden sign at the entrance to Harmony Acres, which had been erected with such fanfare on my stolen land, was unceremoniously torn down by Thorne's crew. A small, but deeply satisfying visual. The remaining residents of the preserve, the ones who hadn't been part of von Uberallis' inner circle, began the arduous process of trying to reform or dissolve what was left of their HOA. Now a toxic brand, synonymous with corruption and failure. Many simply sold and moved, eager to escape the shadow of its disgrace. The systemic humiliation was complete. They had tried to erase me, to build over my history with their bland conformity, and in the end, they had erased themselves. My land, though no longer mine, was at least in the hands of someone who had acquired it legally from me, someone who understood its value, even if only in monetary terms. The millionaire, with his good lawyer, had not only validated my claim but had also served as the instrument of the HOA's destruction, proving definitively that their actions in fencing off my property and attempting to sell it were utterly illegal. The HOA never owned the property. They were thieves, plain and simple, and now the world knew it. There was a quiet justice in that, a sense that the universe, with a little help from a determined landowner and a pragmatic millionaire, had righted a grievous wrong. The memory of their arrogance, their smug pronouncements, their sheer audacity in trying to take my ranch, now served only to sweeten the taste of their utter defeat. They had sown the wind and reaped a whirlwind of their own making. With the substantial sum Atticus Thorne had paid for clear title to my former ranch, a sum that acknowledged the intrinsic value of the land and the egregious wrongs I had suffered, my family and I began a new chapter. The fight had been exhausting, a crucible that had tested our resolve to its limits, but we had emerged, not just intact, but stronger and significantly more solvent. We left the bitterness of Whispering Pines and its disgraced HOA far behind. I bought a beautiful property nestled in the rolling hills of a quieter county, a place with ancient oaks, a clear running stream, and mercifully, no homeowners association for 100 miles in any direction. It wasn't the 500 acres of my ancestral ranch, but it was ours, peaceful and secure. I built a comfortable, unassuming house with a wide porch overlooking a valley that turned gold in the late afternoon sun. This was where I retired, not in defeat, but in triumph. The rage had cooled, replaced by a deep, abiding peace. The fight had been about more than just land. It had been about principle, about refusing to be broken by bullies, about the unwavering belief that right, eventually, prevails if you have the stomach for the fight. My wife planted a garden, and the scent of herbs and roses replaced the metallic tang of fear we had lived with for too long. My children rediscovered the simple joys of playing without looking over their shoulders. Sometimes I'd read about Atticus Thorne in the financial pages. He eventually completed the homes on what was once my land, turning a handsome profit, as was his way. He'd taken the HOA to court, and as I'd hoped, his good lawyer had dismantled their entire fraudulent enterprise, proving their actions in seizing and attempting to sell my property were illegal. The HOA was left with nothing but debts and disgrace. They never owned the land, and the courts made that abundantly, painfully clear to them. I bear Thorne no ill will. He played his game, and in doing so, he inadvertently helped deliver a justice more complete than I might have achieved alone. He got his land. I received more than fair compensation from my ranch, which they kicked me out of, and the HOA, the architects of so much misery, were left desolate. Now, my mornings are spent with a cup of strong coffee on that porch, watching the deer graze in the meadow. The only notices I receive are from the local bird-watching society. The fight is a memory, a scar that has faded to a pale reminder of resilience. We are happy. We are whole. And sometimes, when the light is just right, and a hawk circles overhead, I raise my cup in a silent toast to justice, to peace, and to the enduring truth that no petty tyrant, no matter how inflated their ego, can ever truly extinguish the spirit of a person determined to defend what is rightfully theirs. They tried to take my ranch, my legacy. They ended up giving me a very comfortable retirement and destroying themselves in the process. And that, I suppose, is the ultimate irony.